And prioritization is a very, very important aspect of it. It's very easy to sit and look at a website and come up with like 100 things that you could test. You could do that in half an hour. But what if the 100th thing that you run is the one that delivers the greatest value and gives you the greatest learning? You've wasted a lot of time.
If you're not experimenting in your business, this episode is for you. This episode was like a crash course in experimentation and split testing. Our guest today was Jonny Longden. Jonny is a conversion director at Journey Further, a performance marketing agency working with the world's leading brands. During his 15 years career of improving websites with strategy, experimentation and data, he built and led the conversion team at Sky, as well as overseeing the e-commerce strategy and operations at Principal Hotel Company. In this episode, we dive deep into the concept of split testing, why are they important, how to conduct split tests, experimentation methodology, the pitfalls that need to be avoided when experimenting, and much more. Please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation about CRO with Jonny Longden.
Welcome to the EcomXFactor podcast, where it's all about launching and scaling your business using sales funnels, automations, and smart marketing. And now, please welcome your host, the founder of EcomXFactor, Yaron Bin.
Hi, Jonny. How are you?
I'm great, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited for this talk because normally before I hop on the call, I look at the website of my guest, and I really love the design of your website. And a lot of times the design of the website of the agency or the e-commerce store owner says a lot about the knowledge and experience they are bringing to the table. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
I really love the design. And I saw that you're using a lot. Obviously, we will dive deeper into your story in a minute. But I saw that you guys are using a lot of like kind of lazy loading and showing like popping stuff up when hovering, very dynamic. So, is there an explanation for this?
I don't know. We've had the website like that for quite a while. We're actually in the process of rethinking it a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been like that for quite a long time, and it would have just been the decision of the designer at the time. So, mm-hmm. Nice. But yeah, it's we've always been trying to reflect mm-hmm. our brand well, and really the story behind Journey Further is. We set up Journey Further and we build Journey Further on the basis of trying to sort of open the lid on digital marketing and be transparent mm-hmm. about how it works and educate clients about how it works and things like that. So mm-hmm. The design, was intended to reflect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also very innovative. I think when I landed on the homepage, so there's an option to scroll, and then you immediately get testimonials by customers with the words are appearing one by one. I don't even remember how to say it in English, but it's very cool, very innovative. So I really like this. I encourage people to go and take a look at the website.
Great, thank you.
Can you share a bit about, you have a very long story about experimentation and experience. So can you share a bit of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started off my career in database marketing and direct marketing, so like offline stuff. So I did several jobs where I was working with data for CRM and stuff like that, and eventually got into what is now called data science. So, segmentation and propensity modeling on databases and stuff like that. And then I wanted to flip into digital, so I started working for a digital agency, doing digital analytics with, Google Analytics at the time. This is about 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then whilst I was working there, Google released Google Website Optimizer, which was the first JavaScript-based A/B testing platform. Mm-hmm. And I was instantly hooked, so started using that for several clients and started running A/B tests very, very early on, and never looked back really. So mm-hmm. since then, I've run several agency teams. I particularly for about 4.5 years, I worked for a big agency called RGA. They're big global digital innovation consultancy, and I ran a team there, but also became a management consultant. So I was working with a lot of big brands globally, helping them embed digital analytics experimentation into their businesses. I then went client side. I worked at Visa for a while, working on what is now known as Visa Checkout, which is their version of sort of PayPal, and then went and built a big experimentation function at Sky in the UK, which was interesting. So that was Sky was setting up a big digital centre of excellence where they were housing all of their digital engineering staff. And so I was brought in at the very beginning of that, and with a very broad remit really of just how do we make sure all this stuff is commercially beneficial. And because of my background, my answer to that question was experimentation. So we built a function which is still regarded today as a very progressive way of doing in-house experimentation. It's aligned to all the different agile squads in the business and stuff like that. I then went to be the e-commerce director of a hotel business, a company with about 40 or 50 hotels at the time, and that was a bit of an experiment really, because I thought, I wonder what happens if the person actually in charge of digital is also from an experimentation background, because obviously a lot of the time when you run an experimentation you're up against people who don't necessarily believe in the philosophy of it. But there I ran the P&L for the website and all the digital marketing, and I just applied all that sort of methodology to the same thing, which was very successful. There I hired Journey Further as my PPC agency, and so I was a client, and that's how we got into conversations about starting up the conversion division, and here we are.
Nice, awesome. What excites you the most about the whole experimentation methodology, or like your work? I mean, some people like the copywriting, some people like the data, some people like the persuasion, the understanding of the customer behavior, psychological aspects. So what excites you the most?
Yeah, I think the thing that has always fascinated me is just how wrong people's opinions are. Absolutely, including my own. It would be really easy for me to go around telling people I've been doing this for 14 years, I've been improving websites for donkey's years, I know what's going to work. I have absolutely no idea, because until you test things you cannot guess what's going to work. And every single day things that I think are a no-brainer and they're definitely going to work will have the exact opposite effect. And so that has just always really fascinated me, and actually really interested in why that is, like why are our opinions so wrong, and trying to uncover that. But ultimately, experimentation is about learning. It doesn't matter whether the test goes one way or another. You still, you're basically getting very, very valuable research data on customer behavior. There is no better form of research data on customers in terms of understanding what they actually do. You can go and ask them what they do, but they won't tell you really because they don't know themselves. But when you run a test, you see what actually happens. So it's just that aspect of it has always hooked me and fascinated me.
And were you able to uncover some aspects? I mean, it's obviously there's no answer at the end of the journey, but I think you have new insights.
Yeah, well, I ultimately think that the reason it's so hard to use guesswork and opinion to understand what you should do to a website is because when you do that, you're thinking rationally. So, you can't help but think customers will think this, and then so they're going to do this, and that's how they'll react to this and things like that. And so you're rationalizing customer behavior, and yet customers and people generally don't act rationally. They act irrationally and subconsciously, and they don't know why they do what they do, and they wouldn't be able to tell you if you asked them. So that's the issue: is that you're trying to rationalize something which is not rational at all, and that's why you can come up with an idea that makes complete sense and it seems really well thought through, but then it just has the complete opposite effect. It doesn't work because customer behavior is not rational. So I think it ultimately boils down to that.
And do you have any examples that comes to mind? I mean, from lately that you've already gained experience and you saw so many tests and you thought, okay, this one is going to work or this one is not going to work, and it performed the completely opposite to what you thought.
Yeah, hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, I mean, so I've just a couple of examples, I guess. So we have a client that sell towels and bedding on their website, and through quite a lot of research, what you find is that the big problem really is that you can't feel towels. Like if people buy towels, they want to feel the quality, and towels can very easily have, like they'll shed bits and things like that, or so most people when they buy towels, they want to feel them, they want to feel how soft they are, and you cannot do that online. It's a fundamental barrier. So really a lot of what we try and do with that website is about increasing people's confidence in the quality and talking about the heritage of the brand and all this kind of stuff to basically communicate the quality. But because of that, we thought a really obvious thing would be to try and highlight better how returns are free and how easy the returns are free. So one of the things we did was to test just a little bit of copy on the product page on the PDP in the vicinity of where your click call to action is to buy. They just said free returns with Collect Plus. Collect Plus in the UK is a service where you can drop something at a local convenience store or whatever, so it's very easy to return. And that's, like I said, a little bit of copy, and that decreased the conversion rate by a considerable amount. I think maybe 15% decrease in conversion, just from telling people that they can return something for free.
Do you have an assumption why?
No, well, actually, first of all, we retested it because we'd said free returns with Collect Plus, and there's a possibility that you don't know what Collect Plus is. So we thought maybe some people think, I don't know what that is. It sounds like it's going to be annoying to return. I'm going to have to drive miles to a depot or something. So we tested it without that, and the exact same thing happened. So the only conclusion that, and you kind of make this up in your head, it's not necessarily true, but the only conclusion I came to is that perhaps people wonder why they would want to return it. So you're actually doing the opposite of what you intended, is saying, if you free returns, they might think, well, why would I want to return it? If it's supposed to be really good quality, I wouldn't return it. That's the only thing you can think. But I mean, I have tons and tons of examples like that. Another really good one. I have another client who sell beds, and we were interested in whether offering a discount to new customers, or to new site visitors at least, would help. And so there's literally a pop-up in the checkout that says you're eligible for a 5% discount. And you all you have to do is click a button and it applies it, and that also was about 12% decrease in conversion rate. Now that is insane, right? Like most people would not for a second believe that giving somebody a discount would detrimentally impact conversion rate. It was a fairly quick and dirty test, so there were potentially some execution issues with it, but not to the extent that you would think somebody would not bother buying instead of getting a discount. So the alternative, the one sort of theory might be that actually you're cheapening the experience. Like, sometimes if you give people a discount, maybe they think, well, it might not be very good quality if you're giving a discount. And again, like if you're buying a bed, you can't see it, you can't, lie on it. And, maybe people, they want to feel like it's a slightly premium experience because they want to feel like that's quality. And so perhaps giving a discount makes you sort of cheapens your proposition. But this is exactly why you have to test everything, because you just don't know. You never know.
Yeah, I agree. And but for me, generally speaking, with pop-ups, I have many problems with pop-ups because it's a lot of time it can be like you said, an execution issue. So like a mobile pop-up, did you use a flyout or did you use a pop-up, or how big was the pop-up? When did it show up? Especially for me in mobile, the pop-ups never perform as well as in the desktop. So this is also interesting. What was the method which you've used to show the pop-up? Was it like exit intent or after a few seconds, or do you remember the mechanics?
A couple of second delay, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it's interesting stuff. Awesome. And so let's talk a bit about, zoom out for a second and talk about how you guys conduct an experiment, because I think that many people they don't utilize experiments enough because they are kind of afraid of utilizing this, especially store owners with not a lot of budget, and they think that the majority of the tools might be very expensive. But I suggest people can just try and use like Google Optimize, for example, which is a free tool. But maybe people have the hypothesis that it's very complicated and that you need a lot of traffic. So can you share a bit about how you conduct an experiment from A to Z, like a crash course about experiments?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then the traffic volume thing is a very good point. So we'll come back to that afterwards because that is what people think is the barrier, and it really doesn't have to be a barrier at all. But I guess really what we do is try and follow the same process as the sort of classic scientific method that's used in science, really, and that is ultimately, you start out with a business problem, a business question, which can just be a case of articulating, what it is you're trying to achieve, and whether that's conversion or average order value or whatever, or like how profitability works. First of all, you have to understand, if you're going to improve performance, what is performance? What does it mean? And identify, what your KPIs are and things like that. And then, the second step is observation. And which also means research, and ultimately, you're just trying to take yourself out of the equation as much as possible, knowing that that's never truly possible. But if you run surveys on the website where you ask people why, you can run little pop-up surveys in Hotjar or things like that, and you might say, is there anything that's preventing you from converting today? That sort of stuff. That's people literally telling you about a problem that they've got, which is far better than just looking at competitors' websites and going, I like the way that looks. So observation and research. We're continually doing that all the time, different types of research, which then leads to ideas, which then leads us to design and build and run experiments on the website, and then ultimately we're measuring the outcome of those tests, and we'll come back to that when we talk about traffic volumes. But the statistics of A/B testing is really, really important. It's far more important than people understand. An A/B test is simply a statistical endeavor. What you're doing is you're running a test on a sample of data and trying to infer from that sample whether what you've seen in that observation is a reflection of reality. And sampling and probability is statistics. That is what it is. So it's really important to understand that. And then the final and arguably the most important part is the learning and refinement. Just as I was saying before, really the outcome of the experiment is kind of irrelevant, like whether it's positive or negative. You will learn something. In fact, actually, sometimes the most important pieces of learning you get are from the things that really fail dramatically, specifically because you have learned something radically different about consumers that you didn't know. So all these tests will be based on your assumptions about what will work, and the things that really don't work can really change your mind and change your direction. But after each experiment, asking how do we understand what happened there? What happens next? What do we do next? How do we refine that particular experiment? That's the most important part. So that's the kind of overall process, and that's a continual cycle of research, ideate, test, learn. And we're going through that all the time. So, and one other thing, it's really important to have a really sort of good organized system around that. You know, you very quickly have a lot of different ideas, a lot of different pieces of research, and you need to be able to store all that information in one place, be able to prioritize everything effectively, understand, you know, what's happening with different things. You've got, you know, you end up with little workflows where you've got to try and get things, you know, a bit of copy written for something or whatever. So having a really good organized system, what we call an operating system around that, is very important. And, you know, we'll ultimately make sure that you're delivering as much commercial impact as you can with the program. So that's really the process that we go through. The traffic volumes is a really interesting point, and you know, there's probably a lot of people listening to this who have relatively small websites and might think that it's you know, it's prohibitive to try and do this with small volumes, but it really isn't. It all really comes down to how you're using statistics and how you're using measurement. So an A/B test, really, like the best way I've ever found of describing the statistics of A/B testing is that if you imagine flipping a coin, imagine you want to know whether coins are more likely to land on heads or tails, and you flip a coin 6 times and get 5 heads and 1 tail. You might think coins are more likely to land on heads, but you would be mistaken because you've only flipped it 6 times, and you therefore haven't, you know, got enough sample size in order to be able to see a result that potentially reflects reality. And given that you can't flip the coin 20 million times, you've got to make a decision as to where you're going to draw the line, how many times, you know, you're going to flip the coin. And so there's 2 very important things. One is the sample size, and the other is statistical significance, which is your appetite for risk in terms of where you're going to stop flipping the coin. And so when you design a test, you're ultimately trying to design a test to understand the sample size that you need and the statistical significance that you want. So there are basically parameters that you can play around with as you design a test, and what you're ultimately trying to do is understand what's the most confident that we can be with this test, and how do we get to that level of confidence. And without going into a lot of detail, you know, that you start to have levers that you can pull, like you know, you can absolutely dial down the statistical significance. You know, if you're running a test that's not a huge amount of risk, you can accept less confidence. There are other interesting things you can do, like if you were to run a test and you're measuring it on the actual conversion rate on the website, then that requires a lot more sample size, because the sample size is a product of the size of the conversion rate. So if your conversion rate is 1% and you're calculating a sample size, then that needs a lot more volume than if your conversion rate was 30%. Now, your conversion rate's not going to be 30%, but you've got things like click-through. So you can measure a test on click-through instead of conversion. And, you know, you've got to know that you're absolutely not proving anything other than that you've increased the click-through. That might not mean you're increasing orders, but still, when you've got very small volumes, these are all sorts of things you can play around with. So, yeah, it's absolutely possible, and it's all just a case of understanding the measurement, really. But at the end of the day, you know, like if you think of the world of science, there are lots of cases where scientists are doing things to do with you know, maybe medicines or, you know, other stuff like that, where it's not possible to run absolutely perfect experiments. And sometimes because it's unethical, but sometimes because they don't have the range of data they want. So, you know, even science isn't this world of like absolutely perfect controlled experimentation. It's just about, you know, understanding the best way to do something and the confidence that you can get out of it, and whether that confidence is appropriate. And, you know, even if it's not perfect, it's still better than just putting your finger in the air and guessing. You know, it's still better. So
yeah, and I totally agree. And but I think it's also important to emphasize that some people might shy away from this because they hear the word science and statistics and they get the fright. But basically, if you use Google Optimize or VWO or all the other softwares that are out there, they do this. They give you the analysis they give you the statistical significance as a bottom line. So you don't really need to understand Bayesian test and all the other statistical tests. So I think it's important to emphasize this.
Those tools give you statistical significance, but they don't really have any notion of sample size. So we often find that that something like Google Optimize will say, "Yay, this has won. Deploy it to 100%." And actually, the way we measure it, it hasn't. And we might carry on measuring it for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's got a negative result. So they're not brilliant. I personally think that A/B testing tools do that kind of on purpose, because they want you to be finding winning tests and having a successful time, and so I think it's partially deliberate, but again, if you're starting out, then you probably don't need to worry about that too much, but at some point it is worth trying to understand it in a little bit of detail. The statistics side of it, it's one of those things, it's like a big rabbit hole. Like you can end up going very, very deep into it, and it becoming very, very complicated, but you don't need to go to that level of depth. There's a point where you can understand enough to be sure that you're doing things properly without having to all of a sudden get a PhD in complex mathematics. So but like I say, it is a statistical thing. So what you're doing is a statistical thing. So it is worth understanding it in a bit of detail.
Yeah, for sure. What about, when people they want to A/B test, so it's hard to prioritize. So do you have like a framework for prioritizing? Obviously, you want to prioritize for the most important KPIs, but how do you approach this when you prioritize tests? Or do you do tests simultaneously? Because this is also a pitfall in A/B testing. So can you elaborate regarding these two, prioritization and speed of testing?
Yeah. So we have a system that we use for all of our clients, which has a certain element of prioritization built into it, and for me, one of the most important parts is where on the site you're actually running the test. So if you end up with a big list of like 30 tests that you could run, some of those will be global, i.e. like everybody on the whole website's going to see it. Some of them might be on a particular page. Some of them might be on a particular page, but only to mobile, that sort of stuff. So those different tests, before you even think about what it's likely to do, have a certain opportunity value to them because of the amount of traffic that's going to see it. So that's the first thing, is that you're able to identify the opportunity available based on where you're actually targeting the test to. And then where did that idea come from? So just as I was saying before, in my experience, tests that are based on customer research, where customers have actually verbatim said something to you, or and it's relatively quantitative in that there's a decent amount of it. That's more likely. It doesn't make it definitely likely, but it's more likely to have a positive impact than something that you just come up with from competitive insight or just from your own opinion. So the type of research that gave rise to that idea is important, and what's even more important than that is it a follow-on idea? So is that an idea that's come from a test that you've already run? That has the highest weighting, really. And then also, is it associated with some kind of macro theme? So when you run a lot of tests on a website, you'll start to notice certain things. So, you might run lots of different types of experiments, but then you might notice that everything that's got anything to do with delivery, highlighting delivery fees, it always wins. So you know that there's a sensitivity around delivery generally on the website. And then you might say, well, let's run a load of other tests that are to do with that in different places. But you would want to upweight that because you've learned something from lots of other tests that, is a kind of a macro theme. So before you even sort of start to subjectively think about that individual change, all of that gives you weighting in terms of where the idea came from and what it's got to do with. And then you can also, within that, start to just sort of more subjectively think, like, out of those 10 tests, what might have the greatest impact. But that's ultimately how our prioritization runs. And prioritization is a very, very important aspect of it. It's very easy to sit and look at a website and come up with like 100 things that you could test. You could do that in half an hour. But what if the 100th thing that you run is the one that delivers the greatest value and gives you the greatest learning? You've wasted a lot of time running other stuff. So, the prioritization is basically how you make sure your program is delivering results at pace.
So would you choose testing stuff that are closer to the checkout, or not necessarily? Because do you consider this stuff like the bottom of the funnel more impactful, or not necessarily?
Yeah, well, I mean, for any page, so like you can quite easily calculate. So if you've got Google Analytics and you look at a page, it has a page value against it, and what that means is that there were X number of sessions in which that page was viewed, and the value of each of those page views is whatever. So if you multiply that page value by the unique page values, then that is your opportunity. So, and it depends, like, sort of bottom of the funnel stuff will have high value, but so will aggregate templates. So like, if you're doing a test on all your PDPs or all your PLPs, then that will have huge amount of value. So, you're just trying to identify the greatest opportunities. But yeah, bottom of the funnel in the checkout is always going to have a lot of opportunity value associated to it, because every single conversion is going through that point. You're impacting every single conversion, and also those tests are easier because they're exactly as I was talking about before. The conversion rate is higher. Yeah. So from your payment page to completing the checkout could be 40-50% conversion rate. And so that's an easy test to run from a volume point of view.
In regards to the research, so you mentioned that you use the survey. Do you use also like usability tests? And if so, do you use like a software or a service that helps with the usability tests?
Yeah, so we run usability testing. We use survey tools, heat maps, everything you can think of. Really, we have very good, very strong skills in digital analytics data, which is a big part of my background, as well as experimentation. So we have really interesting ways of extracting data from Google Analytics and analyzing it in ways that you can't do in Google Analytics. And we have behavioral, psychological models, heuristic analysis, everything you can think of, really. So, with research, the more the better, basically. And what you want to do is to start combining the insights from them. So, if you can learn, if you have an idea that is supported by 3 or 4 separate pieces of research, then that suddenly weights that idea again in that sort of prioritization model better than something that just comes from one piece of research. So, but yeah, usability testing. We use a variety of tools, predominantly Userlytics, and we'll do remote, moderated or unmoderated user testing.
Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. And I love the idea, the concept of using like macros, so testing like a macro, like a landscape, a vertical of objections. So for example, maybe sizing, maybe it can be like delivery, product quality, product pricing. So there are different landscapes that can be improved in the funnel. So this is a very interesting concept that I liked.
Yeah, well, that's something that I think quite a lot of people overlook when they run experimentation, because I think one of the misunderstandings of experimentation is that it's about sort of tweaking small things. It's about, conversion optimization is a terrible name for it because it doesn't have to be about conversion. And optimization sort of implies tweaking something that's already been built. But experimentation can drive much, much bigger pieces of innovation. And if you do it right, you can sort of pivot your whole business in different directions of what you're learning. So it's a real mistake to limit what's happening to just sort of small front end changes. And actually, you can have some really big ideas. So I know, when you run the research, you should never limit the ideas, or the scope of what you're coming up with. You can say, right, what would happen if we just fundamentally change the entire commercial model of this business, just totally change the way pricing works, or just shifted the proposition completely, or get rid of this whole product line, or big strategic things that you might do to a business. And there's always a way of testing those things. Now, you can't necessarily just test that whole big thing straight off, but there's always a way of breaking down that big thing into smaller testable things. And that is what experimentation should be doing. You should always be saying, what's the smallest thing that we can test from this idea that demonstrates that there's value in pursuing this idea further. And then you're efficiently testing things without wasting a lot of time and effort on stuff that there's no real potential in.
And I find it's important to emphasize, I'm reading a book about experimentation now, and the book talks a lot about booking.com, and there was a Harvard Business School review about them, and they have an amazing experimentation culture. And they're saying, I hope I'm not messing the numbers, but only 1% of their experiments is producing great results. So 99% of their experiments, they don't really implement the change at the end of the day, because there is some sort of point of diminishing returns. So what is your thought regarding, okay, I've tested enough in regards to this macro. Let's say I tested enough in the bed's website in regards to delivery. Now I need to move on because I kind of squeezed the lemon. Do you have this thought comes up?
Yeah. Well, I think the stat's probably 90%. 10%. So,
okay, sorry.
And that comes from a really interesting study. I think Harvard Business School ran some research where Optimizely, the A/B testing platform, gave them all of the historical data from the platform, so every test that had ever been run. And amongst other things, they found that only 1 in 10 of any test that had ever been run in Optimizely had a significant positive outcome. And I tell people that all the time, because it is a really, really important piece of information about why you need to be testing. Because if you forget about experimentation for a second, what that means is that when you do things to a website, so anything you do to a website, literally like changing any piece of copy or anything, then 90% of that effort is a waste of time, or will actually damage your conversion rate or your revenue or whatever. So that's a hugely important piece of information, and people should sit up and listen to that, because it's sort of pretty much categorical proof that you're wasting a lot of time just guessing what to do to your website. But yeah, I mean, again, it sort of comes back to how you view what experimentation is trying to do. And if you think that the aim of it is to try and find winning tests, then you will only find 1 in 10 winning tests. But the point of it is not that. A losing test has just as much value in terms of what you learn from it. So I always say to people, it's very important that you don't think of it as this sort of tactical thing that's aiming at generating revenue. It's very easy for people to sort of almost think of it like a channel where we do PPC and we spend this much and we get this much back, or we're going to spend this much on SEO and we get this much back. And it's very easy to try and think of it like that, but it completely misunderstands what you're trying to do. Like what it is risk management. Mm-hmm. That is what it is. Like you are investing money, or at least time and effort, in a website, and that carries risk, both from the point of view of wasting that money and time and effort, but also from the point of view of actually doing stuff to your website that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So that's what you're doing. You're protecting that investment, and you're protecting your outward-facing real estate from doing things that don't work. Mm-hmm. So,
do you think that it's only 10% because the people chose the experiments incorrectly, or the experiments were conducted incorrectly, or what is the reason for this?
Yeah, I mean, so when you have a stat like that, when you've been running tests for years, you don't need that stat to tell you that. Like that is the reality of it. Like, I mean, for an agency like us, we're probably at an average of maybe like 3 out of 10 tests win, which is higher than that because they're so heavily researched, and we're also building on tests that win all the time. But it's a fact of life that is very hard to come up with changes on websites that actually have a positive impact. It's not. I don't think it's. I mean, if anything, 1 in 10 will be slightly better than the reality, because all of those things. That's people running experimentation programs. Optimizely is very expensive. Yeah, so that's people running relatively sophisticated experimentation programs, probably with research behind the ideas. And so still 1 in 10 is the positive result. So if you then look at businesses who aren't doing any testing or any research, and they've just got people going, oh, you should do this to our website, that will almost definitely be worse than 1 in 10. So
it might sound a bit frustrating for people, but as you said, if you understand that the goal is to learn more about your product and your audience, so it's all good. Even if you don't implement, even if the test is not a winner, this is not your goal. You want to study more about your audience and gain more insights. We talked a lot about A/B testing, and you said that the whole methodology is about experimenting, and obviously in experimenting there are also Mvt tests, and there is also like split testing. So let's say I have one product page which is like very, let's say, old school, like classical, and some people might split test and send people to a quiz funnel. So how often do you try like something out of the box? This is the first question, and I know I shouldn't ask 2 questions in a row, but I'm going to ask this: what is your take about Mvt tests?
Yeah, I've never ever run an Mvt test in 14 years of running tests, and I guess really the thing is, it sort of goes against the concept of learning that I would place a lot of value on, because what you're effectively doing is just coming up with lots of different changes on a page and trying to find the optimal combination of those. But in doing that, you've basically created, you're including a lot of different hypotheses, and not really learning about the outcome. So you might go, let's have 3 different versions of that image, 3 different versions of that call to action, 3 different versions of that proposition statement. And then basically it's going to tell you what's the optimum combination of them. But what I want to know is, if I change that image from that to that, why might that be? Why might that have happened? What does that potentially say about customer behavior? How can I use that understanding to then go and change other things elsewhere? And so, that is really the concept of hypothesis testing, which is, a hypothesis is a binary thing where you want to understand just in that singular thing how that works. And then be able to use that information. But if you've changed loads of stuff, you might be finding the optimal combination of all that stuff, but you're not really learning why. Or you're not really isolating these different sort of things that you've done.
But
so that's...
Sorry, but in a way, if I do, let's say, one experiment, and I see, I mean, this is I think the pitfall in A/B testing. So let's say I compare headline A and headline B. Okay, headline B1, so this is going to be my control from now on, and now I'm testing the image. So let's say image B1, but all in all, if I use headline A with image A, maybe the conversion will higher because everything in the landing page, everything works together. So you can have one maybe the headline works the best, but with the testimonials and images in the page, they don't convert and create best AOV and best conversion rates. So you get what I mean. So every element doesn't stand on its own. So this is kind of a pitfall in A/B testing that MVT is supposed to solve. Am I correct? Or you don't see this way? Yeah,
well, so MVT basically relates to the fact that you're going to have different combinations of different things, and it's going to find all the different specific combinations of different things. But the other problem with it is you actually do need a hell of a lot of volume, really. Like the statistics of MVT, the specific statistics of MVT are different from running a normal A/B test. And if you think that you've got traffic to a page and you're going to effectively break that down into like maybe 12 segments because of the different combinations of things, then you in theory need a hell of a lot of traffic to be able to prove those things. But the way the statistics is set up is trying to get around the fact that you've got lots of different little combinations. So it's a bit dubious, I would say. But in that example that you gave, you've really only got 4 combinations. So that's really 2 A/B tests. And if you run one A/B test with one variant, or one A/B test with 3 variants, then you're just increasing the amount of time that you need for the second one. So
in this case, you would have just done like ABCD test instead of, in a way, because the problem with A/B testing, if you do them in a sequence, so you're not necessarily getting the best page because it's all about the combination and like the whole message in the page. So, but I get what you mean.
Yeah.
And what about the split testing? The question that I asked before. I mean, how often?
Split URL testing.
Yeah, redirect test.
Yeah. So it depends. I mean, we do that fairly frequently, particularly when we're building new landing pages. So we might one thing we do fairly frequently is we create new landing pages to land traffic on instead of directly onto a PDP around a particular product or possibly even a category, because what you find invariably is that the template of an e-commerce website, like the product page, it's really designed for the interaction within that website, but they're not necessarily haven't necessarily been designed with a landing page in mind. A landing page, if you've never been to that website, it needs to do certain things like tell a little bit about the brand story and have kind of reasonably rich, interesting content to to get your attention and all that kind of stuff. So product pages and pages on e-commerce websites don't really make very good landing pages. So what we'll often do is create a new landing page which is almost like an interstitial advert that is designed to sell the product or the category or whatever, and then get people through to that. And even if it as with all tests, it doesn't necessarily always work, but if you can get it to work, you can even get it to just be flat, then what you've got is a really good place to start testing different proposition messages and different messages around the product benefits and things like that in an easier way than you can on an actual product page. So with something like that, we would definitely do a redirect test where traffic will come and land on the original page, and we'll just redirect 50% of that to the landing page. So there's a few of the little examples like that, but mostly it's because there's a new page not we're going to duplicate an existing page, modify the content, and then redirect it. With modern A/B testing tools, that's a bit pointless, really. But we do that.
Cool. Interesting. Since you have a lot of clients and you see things from a broad perspective, and I know it's a general question and it's kind of problematic, but do you see any trends like in 2021? People VSLs are working better than in the past, or content like pre-sale pages, like you mentioned now, are working better. So do you see any trends coming up lately?
There's obviously generally a big impact of COVID on e-commerce traffic and e-commerce buying. Without a doubt, that's all just very positive. So I'd say all of our e-commerce clients have seen a really positive effect of COVID. Some particularly during the lockdowns. Homewares and home DIY and home improvement and furniture and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But you've just got the thing as well that all of a sudden people who would never have thought of buying something online had to do it, and so had to get their head around it. And once they've done it, then they're kind of converted. So you've just got a lot more of the population suddenly savvy with buying things online. So that's without a doubt, I'd say, the biggest trend that you could say was for definite lately. Other than that, I don't know. I think it's not so much a trend from a consumer behavior point of view, but there's some interesting things like the drive towards personalization and AI and things like that. It's quite just an interesting area. I personally think there's potentially a huge amount of value in personalization for a lot of brands, but a lot of people sort of jump on it as a bandwagon. They think, oh, we need to do personalization without really thinking about what personalization means for them. And some brands, you kind of think, well, they only sell one product. Like, why do they want to personalize? There's nothing to personalize, So, it's one of those things that we hear a lot, and I'm all for it. But I think you need to really sort of think about the strategy for it and think about what it means and like why personalize and what that looks like before you get into it. And the same with AI, algorithmically prioritized lists of stuff and things like that. Great, but will that actually have a benefit? All this stuff again. You have to find ways of testing it. So test everything is my motto.
Yeah, I agree. And like personalization and also localization, in theory they sound amazing, but there are so many ways to do this wrong. So people need to be aware of this. Like. So this is one thing that is important. One last question before we conclude. What is your take? I mean, how much thought do you give into offering different payments methods, like pay after pay, or using offering Google Pay or Apple Pay, stuff like that? Do you give a thought to payment methods, and how important do you feel this aspect is?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a great way of testing payment methods, which is technically called painted door testing. And so if you're an e-commerce store and you're thinking, should we offer PayPal? You can't really test that in theory, because you would have to integrate PayPal. You've got to do all the work to integrate it, and then once you've done it, you've done it. So you might as well just live with it. But what you can do is test just putting get an image of the PayPal button, put it on the website, and you're technically not probably supposed to do that. But if you do a short-term test, what you then get to measure is, so if you get it, people click it, you just say, sorry, this isn't available right now. And what you can then measure is, if they click it and then buy anyway, then that would have been unnecessary transactional fees to PayPal. If they click it and then drop off, that's your lost opportunity by not having it. And then you can make a little business case that's the net impact of that.
Nice.
And also whether it increases conversion, because it can do. It can, just literally just it being there can increase conversion. It's like a confidence trust mark. So, and you put all that together, and then you can understand whether it's worth bothering doing. So, yeah, absolutely. But we've, just like as I was saying right at the beginning, these things are not a given that it will have a positive impact. We've tested that sort of stuff on clients. So we've tested removing payment methods where they've already got them there, and it's positively increased conversion for various reasons. One particular one, we removed Amazon Pay, and so don't know for definite. The insight that I think was behind that is that it was an older audience, and I think when if you think, oh, that sounds convenient, I'll click that, but then if you don't know your password, you're going to end up in like a password reset loop and all this kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily a given that those things would work, but absolutely, there's a fundamental part of the e-commerce experience should definitely be tested.
Interesting, very interesting. And the majority of the shops that you work with are Shopify or not necessarily?
Range, really, Shopify, Magento, some custom platforms,
Because it's kind of an issue with Shopify. I mean, I know they are supposed to launch a new checkout, but at the moment the checkout is kind of is so you can't really customize it, so you can't really test anything in the checkout. But I think they are launching something new by the end of the month. This is apparently what they are planning to do. Cool. This was awesome. I wanted to ask you which books or which people do you follow in order to extend your knowledge in regards to CRO? Is there any like go-to books that people should look into that really shaped your thoughts regarding this field?
Yeah, I think so. What we talked about before about the Harvard Business School review, that is documented in a book called Experimentation Works by Stefan Tomka. That's a really good book. It's not so much about the practical how-to of it. It's more about the philosophy of why you should do it, which I personally find very interesting. There are tons and tons of books that are about the nitty-gritty of how to do experimentation. You just have to search on Amazon. Most of them are pretty good. But personally, I quite like to read books that are not directly about that, but have value towards it. So books about things like continuous improvement processes and how innovation works and things like that. Nice. So I'll tend to read things like that are from broader fields, but that have an application in terms of what we do.
This is the book that I'm reading at the moment. What you mentioned by Stefan Thomas, and I think for me one of the most important books was also the book by Avinash Kaushik, Web Analytics. It was published like 10 years ago. It's more about the technical aspects of Google Analytics. I read that when that very first came out, and it was very influential at the start of my career. I think it's got to be more like 15 years. Yeah, it's very old.
Yeah. But that was a great book.
And the continuous progress is for me. It's also an important principle. Are you referring to Kaizen? It's like a Japanese that continuous improvement all the time, incremental improvement. So do you have any good books about this topic? Because I also love reading, not necessarily CRO.
There is one that I read quite a while ago, but I'm pretty sure it's called The Spirit of Kaizen.
Cool.
And then there's another one that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. It's in the title is something to do with continuous improvement, but I can't remember the rest of the title. But.
Great, cool. Anyway, send it to me later. Cool, Jonny. It was such a huge pleasure. Very interesting. I love CRO stuff and all the stuff that is about testing, and you shared a lot of interesting insights that for me I want to look how can I implement and do this better? Because I kind of feel that we're not systemizing our split test in our company well enough. And I love the few ideas that you shared. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And have a where can people find more about you guys, follow you guys, contact you for your services?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. That's where I put out most content. Yeah, that's, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I'm always on there. I'm also completely and utterly open to anybody just reaching out for a chat for whatever reason. I never turn that stuff down. So yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to start. Awesome. And both myself and the Journey Further company page.
Cool. Most of the time I ask the guest if I forgot to ask anything, but now I look at my notes and one thing that I forgot to ask, and I know we're already going offline, but can you share a bit about the book club that you guys have? What is it about?
Yeah, so that started out as an internal thing, really. So we started out just having an internal sort of group sharing business books that we'd read that were interesting, and what we try and do is get together and think, is there a way we can change our business based on this? So we tended to read a lot of things about management, ways of working and things like that, company culture, all that sort of stuff, and we would sit and think, like, how can we change the way we work based on what we've learned from this? And then we just started to broaden it out, so it was a bit more external, and particularly involving clients in it and things like that. And then it just sort of grew from there. So now it's basically a community of a kind of a social community, really, that we'll still sort of pick a book. We'll pick a topic. We do actually send the books out to clients and people like that. But then we're trying to kind of foster a discussion about those things and just get people to collectively think how they can run their businesses differently based on that. Awesome. So yeah, by all means get on our website, or just type Journey Further Book Club into Google and sign up. Yeah, it's free to sign up, obviously. So
awesome, great. Thank you so much, Jonny. Have a nice day.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Bye. Take care.